This is a continuation of the supplemental midterm review. This video will cover the last few questions, numbers 5 through 9. So we'll get started. The first one is a multiple choice question, and it says, which of the following equations is an identity? So if you don't remember, an equation that is an identity is basically one that is equal to itself, or in a sense, it identifies itself as if you're looking in a mirror. And so honestly, to make that decision, unless you just can glance through the list here and figure it out, you basically have to simplify each one of the equations that are given. So if I simplify the first one, it turns out to be 18x minus 21. And on the right side, I have 18x plus 21, which hopefully you realize those are not the same. So those are that does not represent an identity. For the second one, we have 35x plus 10. And on the right side, we have negative 31x minus 10. And again, those two things are not equal. So we know that it is not an identity. The third one, when you square 4x, you should get 16 over x squared, which again does not equal 8 over x squared. So again, that is not an identity. Finally, for the fourth one, if you do x plus 5 squared, that's literally x plus 5 times x plus 5, and using full, we get x squared plus 5x plus 5x plus 25, which simplifies to x squared plus 10x plus 25, which, if you'll notice, is equal to the right side. The right side is x squared plus 10x plus 25. The left side simplifies to x squared plus 10x plus 25. So letter D is the one that's the identity. The last option is none of the above, but we just determined that D was an identity. Again, an identity is an equation that is equal to itself. Number 6 is they ask you simply to find the slope of a line that passes through 2 points. So be careful, because earlier on the review, it asked you to find the equation of a line. Okay, so be careful, because this one only wants you to find the slope. Don't do more work than you need to. The slope formula is on the midterm at the very beginning. There's a listing of formulas, and it's one of the ones provided, but I've written it here. The slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I like to label my points so I don't get confused when I'm plugging in. So I have x1, y1 in the first pair, and x2, y2 will be the second pair. So I'm going to substitute into the equation. So I would have negative 3 minus 4 over 6 minus a minus 2. So that gives me negative 7 over 6 plus 2, which is 8. So I end up with a slope of negative 7/8. Now again, in some of the questions, they ask you to write the answer as a decimal if it's not an integer. Well, negative 7/8 is not an integer. It's a rational number. As a decimal to 3 places, it's negative 0.875. So if I round that to 2 places, kind of review rounding with you here a little bit, since there's a 5 next to the 7, the 5 is going to bump the 7, and it's going to become negative 0.88. Again, it asks for 2 decimal places. Number 7, again, is a different kind of question. It asks you, what is the slope of the line? And they give you the equation of a line, but it's in kind of a general form or a standard form that's not very helpful. The easiest way to do this problem is to take this equation of the line that you're given, the equation of the line that you're given, and solve for y, so that when you get it solved for y, the equation is in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b, and we know that the slope is the coefficient on the x. So if I take the equation that we're given, 4x minus 2y equals 8, and I solve for y, the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 4x from either side. So I have negative 2y equals negative 4x plus 8. Then I need to divide everything by negative 2, again to isolate the y. Watch your signs now, be careful. So we end up with y equals negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2x, and 8 divided by negative 2 is minus 4. Again, remember though, I'm looking for the slope, and the slope is the coefficient on the x, which is 2. So the slope of the line that I was given is 2. Again, to review something, I didn't see it on the midterm, but you may want to be aware of it. Remember, parallel lines have the same slope, and perpendicular lines, we have negative reciprocals. Okay, so just be aware of that. Number 8 asks you simply to write an inequality in interval notation. The inequality is already solved for x, so there's not a lot of work to do here. What you do have to remember is when you have less than or greater than, we use a parenthesis, okay, because the endpoint is not included or not used in the problem. But if you have less than or equal or greater than or equal, then you use a bracket because the endpoint is used or included in the answer. So there is a difference between whether you include it or you don't. So to write negative 5 less than x less than or equal to 6, I would have negative 5 as my beginning point. It is not included, so it gets a parenthesis, comma. My other endpoint is 6. It is less than or equal, so it is included, so it gets a bracket. And finally, the last one is an inequality that they ask you to solve. And again, I don't remember seeing this on the first test or throughout the lessons. And it's a rather lengthy explanation, so I'll try to go slow enough for you to follow it. The first thing we want to do is find the critical numbers. And remember, to find the critical numbers, we take the expression and set it equal to 0. So if I take x squared plus 8x plus 7 and set it equal to 0, and then I need to solve for x, and I believe this will factor for me. It is a quadratic, so we solve it by factoring. So a pair of numbers that multiply to 7 and add to 8, I can use 1 and 7. So I know that x plus 1 is equal to 0 and x plus 7 is equal to 0. solving each of those respectively for x by, let's see, subtracting 1, I have x equals -1, and then subtracting 7, I have x equals -7. So my critical numbers are -1 and -7. And the easiest way to do this from that point then is to look at the number line. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we have one critical value at -1 and the other one is at -7. And so what I have to try to decide is, where would I look for the correct answers? Should I look at numbers that are to the left of -7? Should I look for them between -1 and -7? Or should I look for numbers that are to the right? Okay, so unfortunately, this really becomes a trial and error. So I'm going to first consider a number that is to the left of -7. Maybe let's do -9. Okay, so here's my trial. I'm going to try -9. I'm going to plug it in. So I have -9 squared plus 8 times -9 plus 7, and I'm wondering if that is greater than or equal to 0. So I would have 81 minus 72 plus 7. Is that greater than or equal to 0? So I would have 81 plus 7 is 88, and 88 minus 72 would be 16. So I have a value of 16, and 16 is greater than 0, so that gives me a true statement. So that is my clue that I should use numbers that are below 7. Since it's less than or equal to, I could use -7. So I want to choose numbers that are over here to the left of -7. Then I'm going to try a number between -7 and -1. Let's try -5. So I have -5 squared plus 8 times -5 plus 7, and I'm wondering if that is greater than or equal to 0. So I have 25 minus 40 plus 7 is greater than or equal to 0. So 25 minus 40 is -15, plus 7 is -8. Well, -8 is not greater than or equal to 0. So I don't want to use any numbers in that region. And then finally, I need to check to see, what about numbers bigger than -1? We typically avoid using 0 and 1 because sometimes they do kind of some weird things. So what I would do from there is maybe try the number +2, so that I would have 2 squared plus 8 times 2 plus 7, and I'm wondering if that's greater than or equal to 0. So I would have 4 plus 16 plus 7, and I'm wondering if that's greater than or equal to 0. I get 27 is greater than or equal to 0, which is a true statement. So that lets me know that I can use numbers that are bigger than -1, and I can again actually include -1 since it is greater than or equal to, because it could be exactly 0. And again, the last thing you have to do is write your answer in interval notation. And this is kind of a weird interval because you have two pieces. So you have the piece on the left, which would be from -infinity to -7, which is included, or, and the symbol for or is a U looking symbol, that's the union, Then we start back at -1 and we go to positive infinity. So your answer is I can choose any number between negative infinity and -7, or I can choose any number from -1 to positive infinity.